I am writing this under an appreciable mental strain, since by tonight I shall be no more. Penniless, and at the end of my supply of the drug which alone makes life endurable, I can bear the torture no longer, and shall cast myself from this garret window into the squalid street below. Do not think from my slavery to morphine that I am a weakling or a degenerate. When you have read these hastily scrawled pages, you may guess, though never fully realize, why it is that I must have forgetfulness or death.
목숨을 끊기 전 자신이 겪은 일들을 기록하기 시작하는 남자.
It was in one of the most open and least frequented parts of the broad Pacific that the packet of which I was supercargo fell a victim to the German sea raider.
남자는 화물선을 관리하던 선원이었고 독일군에게 공격당해 납포당하고 말았습니다.
The Great War was then at its very beginning, and the ocean forces of the Hun had not completely sunk to their later degradation, so that our vessel was made a legitimate prize, whilst we of her crew were treated with all the fairness and consideration due us as naval prisoners.
남자는 독일군에게 포로 대우를 받으며 목숨을 유지했고 독일군이 한눈을 판 사이 물과 식량을 챙겨 보트로 탈출했죠. 하지만 그것이 잘못이었을까? 보트를 탄 남자의 눈엔 아무것도 없는 망망대해만 들어왔고 그늘 하나 없는 땡볕 아래에서 혹시 모를 구조나 어딘가의 땅에 닿기를 기대하며 바다 위를 떠돌았죠. 그렇게 한참을 표류하던 남자는 깜빡 잠에 들었고
The change happened whilst I slept. Its details I shall never know. For my slumber, though troubled and dream-infested, was continuous.
눈을 떠보니 검고 질척이는 수렁 안에 여러 존재들이 꿈틀거리고 있었죠. 남자는 이 믿기지 않는 광경에 공포를 느꼈고 자신이 타고 왔던 보트로 가보았습니다. 남자는 이곳이 지진으로 인해 드러난 수백만 년 동안 잠들어 있던 해저 지형이라고 생각했지만 어떤 파도 소리나 한 마리의 바다새조차 발견할 수 없었죠.
On the third morning, I found the soil dry enough to walk upon with ease. The odor of the fish was maddening, but I was too much concerned with graver things to mind so slight an evil, and set out boldly for an unknown goal.
남자는 걸을 수 있게 마른 수렁에 발을 내딛었고
All day I forged steadily westward, guided by a faraway hummock which rose higher than any other elevation on the rolling desert.
눈에 들어오는 높게 솟아오른 머나먼 언덕을 향해 발걸음을 옮겼죠.
By the fourth evening, I attained the base of the mound, which turned out to be much higher than it had appeared from a distance. An intervening valley setting it out in sharper relief from the general surface. Too weary to ascend, I slept in the shadow of the hill.
그렇게 한참을 걸어 언덕 아래에 도착한 남자는 잠시 잠에 들었고
I know not why my dreams were so wild that night. But ere the waning and fantastically gibbous moon had risen far above the eastern plain, I was awake in a cold perspiration, determined to sleep no more. Such visions as I had experienced were too much for me to endure again. And in the glow of the moon I saw how unwise I had been to travel by day. Without the glare of the parching sun, my journey would have cost me less energy. Indeed, I now felt quite able to perform the ascent which had deterred me at sunset. Picking up my pack, I started for the crest of the eminence.
악몽과 함께 깨어난 남자는 언덕 위에 올라가 보기로 합니다.
I have said that the unbroken monotony of the rolling plain was a source of vague horror to me. But I think my horror was greater when I gained the summit of the mound and looked down the other side into an immeasurable pit or canyon, whose black recesses the moon had not yet soared high enough to illumine. I felt myself on the edge of the world.
꼭대기에 도착한 남자는 눈앞에 들어온 끝을 알 수 없는 협곡을 보며 세상의 끝에 도달한 것 같은 이상한 기분이 들었고 달빛에 비친 협곡을 보자 아래로 내려가고 싶은 마음이 들었죠.
Ledges and outcroppings of rock afforded fairly easy footholds for a descent. Whilst after a drop of only a few hundred feet, the declivity became very gradual.
그렇게 협곡 아래로 내려가 보는 남자.
Urged on by an impulse which I cannot definitely analyze, I scrambled with difficulty down the rocks and stood on the gentler slope beneath, gazing into the Stygian deeps where no light had yet penetrated. All at once, my attention was captured by a vast and singular object on the opposite slope, an object that gleamed whitely in the newly bestowed rays of the ascending moon.
그때 거대하고 특이한 무언가가 남자의 눈에 들어왔고
That it was merely a gigantic piece of stone, I soon assured myself. But I was conscious of a distinct impression that its contour and position were not altogether the work of nature. A closer scrutiny filled me with sensations I cannot express.
남자는 자연이 만든 게 아닌 것에 이상한 기분이 들었고
For despite its enormous magnitude and its position in an abyss which had yawned at the bottom of the sea since the world was young, I perceived beyond a doubt that the strange object was a well-shaped monolith, whose massive bulk had known the workmanship and perhaps the worship of living and thinking creatures. Dazed and frightened, yet not without a certain thrill of the scientist's or archaeologist's delight, I examined my surroundings more closely.
저 거대한 돌덩이가 뛰어난 기술과 높은 지성을 가진 생명체를 숭배하는 모노리스라고 생각해 흥분하였죠.
The moon, now near the zenith, shone weirdly and vividly above the towering steeps that hemmed in the chasm, and revealed the fact that a far-flung body of water flowed at the bottom, winding out of sight in both directions and almost lapping my feet as I stood on the slope. Across the chasm, the wavelets washed the base of the cyclopean monolith, on whose surface I could now trace both inscriptions and crude sculptures.
그렇게 남자는 조심스럽게 거대한 모노리스에 접근했고
The writing was in a system of hieroglyphics unknown to me and unlike anything I'd ever seen in books. Consisting for the most part of conventionalized aquatic symbols such as fishes, eels, octopi, crustaceans, mollusks, whales, and the like. Several characters obviously represented marine things which are unknown to the modern world, but whose decomposing forms I had observed on the ocean-risen plain. It was the pictorial carving, however, that did most to hold me spellbound. Plainly visible across the intervening water on account of their enormous size were an array of bas-reliefs whose subjects would have excited the envy of a doré. I think that these things were supposed to depict men, at least a certain sort of men, though the creatures were shown disporting like fishes in the waters of some marine grotto, or paying homage at some monolithic shrine which appeared to be under the waves as well. Of their faces and forms I dare not speak in detail, for the mere remembrance makes me grow faint, grotesque beyond the imagination of a Poe or a Bulwer. They were damnably human in general outline, despite webbed hands and feet, shockingly wide and flabby lips, glassy, bulging eyes, and other features less pleasant to recall. Curiously enough, they seem to have been chiseled badly out of proportion with their scenic background. For one of the creatures was shown in the act of killing a whale, represented as but little larger than himself. I remarked, as I say, their grotesqueness and strange size, but in a moment decided that they were merely the imaginary gods of some primitive fishing or seafaring tribe. Some tribe whose last descendant had perished eras before the first ancestor of the Piltdown or Neanderthal man was born.
남자는 끔찍한 외형을 하고 있는 존재들의 그림을 보곤 큰 충격을 받았고
Awestruck at this unexpected glimpse into a past beyond the conception of the most daring anthropologist, I stood musing whilst the moon cast queer reflections on the silent channel before me. Then, suddenly, I saw it. With only a slight churning to mark its rise to the surface, the thing slid into view above the dark waters. Polyphemus-like and loathsome, it darted like a stupendous monster of nightmares to the marlin, about which it flung its gigantic scaly arms, while it bowed its hideous head and gave vent to certain measured sounds.
어두운 물속에서 튀어나온 괴물을 보곤 정신이 나가고 말았죠.
I think I went mad then. Of my frantic ascent of the slope and cliff, and of my delirious journey back to the stranded boat, I remember little.
남자는 왔던 길을 미친 듯이 뛰어 되돌아갔고,
I believe I sang a great deal and laughed oddly when I was unable to sing. I have indistinct recollections of a great storm sometime after I reached the boat. At any rate, I know that I heard pearls of thunder and other tones which nature utters only in her wildest moods.
보트에 도착한 남자는 엄청난 소리를 들으며 정신을 잃고 말았죠.
When I came out of the shadows, I was in a San Francisco hospital. Brought thither by the captain of the American ship which had picked up my boat in mid-ocean. In my delirium, I had said much, but found that my words had been given scant attention. Of any land upheaval in the Pacific, my rescuers knew nothing. Nor did I deem it necessary to insist upon a thing which I knew they could not believe.
다행히 미국 상선에게 구조를 받은 남자는 자신이 본 것들을 이야기해보았지만 아무도 믿지 않았습니다. 저명한 민족학자에게 이야기를 해봐도 별다른 건 없었죠. 그 후로 남자는 왼쪽 부분이 볼록해진 달이 뜨는 밤마다 그것을 보게 되었고 결국 모르핀까지 투여하게 되었습니다.
Often, I ask myself if it could not all have been a pure phantasm, a mere freak of fever as I lay sun-stricken and raving in the open boat after my escape from the German man-of-war. This I ask myself, but ever does there come before me a hideously vivid vision in reply. I cannot think of the deep sea without shuddering at the nameless things that may at this very moment be crawling and floundering on its slimy bed, worshipping their ancient stone idols and carving their own detestable likenesses on submarine obelisks of water-soaked granite. I dream of a day when they may rise above the billows to drag down into their reeking talons the remnants of puny, war-exhausted mankind. Of a day when the land shall sink and the dark ocean shall ascend amidst universal pandemonium.
지금까지의 이야기가 남자가 겪었던 일들이며 남자는 이 내용을 모두 작성한 뒤 목숨을 끊을 계획이었죠.
The end is near. I hear a noise at the door, as of some immense slippery body lumbering against it.
그런데 그때 무언가가 남자의 방문을 두드렸고
It shall not find me. God, that hand! The window! The window!
남자는 창문으로 몸을 던지며 게임은 막을 내립니다. 이 게임은 러브크래프트가 쓴 단편인 다곤을 게임으로 옮긴 것인데요. 원작의 내용을 그대로 표현했다는 호평들이 많았습니다. 개인적으로 러브크래프트의 작품들과 크툴루 신화는 별로 관심이 안 갔는데 이 게임을 한 이후로 좀 관심이 생겼네요. 게임의 분위기는 굉장히 좋았지만 따로 조작할 점이 거의 없는 것은 호불호가 갈릴 요소겠네요. 개인적으로 흥미롭게 감상했습니다. 미지의 것에 대한 공포가 상당히 재밌었네요. 지금까지 핸드준이었습니다. 구독과 좋아요 부탁드리며 다음에 더 재밌는 이야기로 찾아뵙도록 하겠습니다. 안녕.